Hey, welcome to The Explainer, where we unpack those huge moments and big ideas from history. So, have you ever wondered how something as massive as the American Civil War could possibly start in one single place? Well, today we're zeroing in on exactly that, how this one fort right in the middle of Charleston, South Carolina, became the literal flashpoint. A long brewing political storm was about to become a real one, and it was all focused right here. Imagine that, 4:30 in the morning. A single mortar shell lights up the sky. That was it. That was the first shot. The moment all the talk, all the tension just exploded into actual war. And that one single blast, it kicked off a conflict that would end up taking hundreds of thousands of lives and totally change the country. But to really get why that shell was fired, we gotta look at what made the whole situation a powder keg to begin with.
All right, so let's rewind a bit. Because to get the full picture, you need to understand that Fort Sumter wasn't just some random military building. Oh no, it was a fortress built right on top of a massive national fault line.
So, the whole idea for Fort Sumter came about way back after the War of 1812. The plan was to build this super strong coastal defense. They started working in 1829, and get this, they built a whole artificial island for it using 70,000 tons of granite that they had to ship all the way from New England. But the project was just cursed from the start. They ran out of money, there were problems with who owned the land, there's even disease. The whole thing just dragged on for more than 30 years. And by 1860, believe it or not, it was still unfinished and barely armed. Okay, so now things are getting really tense in the country, right? The big arguments over states' rights and slavery are just boiling over. And then, bam, South Carolina secedes. It just leaves the Union. All of a sudden, this unfinished U.S. Army fort sitting in their harbor isn't a federal asset anymore. To them, it's now a foreign military base on their soil. And just like that, the fort status becomes the absolute center of this massive national crisis. So only 6 days after South Carolina secedes, this one guy, U.S. Army Major Robert Anderson, decides to take matters into his own hands. And it was a really gutsy move, totally unauthorized. He looked at his position at the nearby Fort Moultrie and thought, there's no way we can defend this place. So he orders his men to spike the cannons. Basically, they just jammed them up so no one else could use them. And then, in the middle of the night, he secretly moves his entire garrison, all 127 men, over to the much stronger, much more defensible Fort Sumter. His thinking was, hey, if we're in a stronger fort, maybe they won't attack us.
Well, it turns out he was wrong. His move didn't prevent a conflict at all. In fact, it made things way, way worse. South Carolina was furious. They saw this as a hostile act, a total violation of their brand new independence. So for months, the governor and other officials are just demanding over and over that the U.S. Army get out, surrender the fort. So you can just feel the tension ratcheting up, right? Charleston Harbor is now the national flashpoint. Everyone is watching. And inside the fort, Major Anderson's men are starting to run out of food. This is where the brand new president, Abraham Lincoln, has to make a huge call. And he does. He decides he's going to send a naval fleet to bring supplies to the fort. Not to reinforce it with more soldiers, just to bring food. But even so, it was a move that basically forced the other side to make a choice.
And with that supply fleet on its way, the Confederates knew the clock was ticking. They decided they couldn't wait another minute. The time for talking was officially over. There was one last attempt to talk it out, but it went nowhere. In the wee hours of April 12th, after Major Anderson gave his final no, the Confederate officers basically said, all right, that's that. They went straight to a nearby cannon battery and gave the order. And at 4:30 a.m., the cannons all around the harbor just erupted. And it wasn't just a few shots. The bombardment was absolutely relentless. It went on for 34 hours straight. Can you even imagine? Shells were just pouring down on the fort. And the craziest part? People in Charleston, they gathered on their rooftops and balconies to watch. It was like a public spectacle, like they were watching fireworks. Meanwhile, inside the fort, Anderson's men were just trying to survive. They really couldn't do much else. They were completely outgunned. And here's a key detail. They didn't have the right fuses for their explosive shells. So all they could shoot back were these solid iron cannonballs, which are way less effective. They fired back, but slowly, trying to make every shot count and save their ammo. At one point, the flag actually got shot down, but an officer ran out, completely exposed, and raised it right back up again. Just an incredible act of defiance. And so, after 34 long hours, it was over. The barracks inside the fort were on fire, supplies were gone. Major Anderson had no choice but to surrender. The first battle of the Civil War had come to an end. But given how intense this all was, a day and a half of constant cannon fire, the actual human cost was
Well, let's just say it wasn't what anyone expected. This is one of the wildest ironies in American history. After 34 hours of thousands of shells being fired, not a single soldier was killed in combat. Not one, on either side. The only casualties actually happened after the surrender was official. They were doing a 100-gun salute, a cannon accidentally misfired, and a couple of Union soldiers died. So the war that would become the bloodiest in the nation's history, it started with a whole lot of noise and almost no bloodshed.
But the surrender of that fort was the spark. It ignited the Civil War, and the country was plunged into 4 years of absolute carnage. And the fort itself, the very symbol of where it all began, was about to go through a pretty brutal transformation of its own.
The Union tried and tried to get the fort back during the war, but they never could. What they could do, though, was bombard it. Starting in 1863, Union ships just shelled it relentlessly, and they basically pulverized it. That proud 50-foot-high brick fortress was just smashed into a pile of rubble. It went from being this key military asset to just ruins.
But this is where the story comes full circle in this really powerful, almost cinematic way. On April 14th, 1865, 4 years to the exact day that he surrendered, Robert Anderson, now a major general, returns to the ruins of Fort Sumter. He brings with him the very same flag he was forced to take down, and he raises it back up. It's this incredible moment of triumph, but it's also incredibly tragic, because that very same night, just hours later, President Lincoln was assassinated.
So when you think about it, what a journey for one place. From an unfinished, forgotten fort to the spark that lit the fuse of the Civil War, and now a national monument where people go to reflect. The fort is still there. It's a permanent physical reminder of the nation's biggest, most painful struggle with itself. It just stands there, silently in Charleston Harbor, a monument to a terrible division, but also to the incredibly costly reunion that followed.